Okay, so we're starting chapter 9, talking about search planning and coverage. Really, this is more orientation so you kind of understand the big picture. It's not all that applicable to you as a scanner in the cockpit of a CAP airplane. But to understand how all this fits together, we've got some background material, and that's what this is here. So we're going to define the following terms: ground and search track, maximum area of possibility, meteorological and search visibility. Some of these you already talked about. Again, we're re-emphasizing certain things by repetition. The probability area, probability of detection, scanning range. Remember, we already talked about that. Search altitude, we already talked about. We haven't really talked about track spacing per se, although we've alluded to it. We'll also take a look at CAP participation in disasters, talk a little bit about what kind of things are relevant if you're doing damage assessment. So that is important information as a scanner, listing what you're going to be looking for, and we'll talk about the limitations of an air search for missing personnel. And I think we've already mentioned that finding a person on the ground is very, very difficult, and we saw that in some of the pictures we looked at as well. So let's talk about some search terms. Ground track, that's basically the path that a airplane is taking over the Earth. So it's an imaginary line on the ground that is underneath our flight path there. One of the tools that the incident commander uses is the maximum area of possibility. And essentially what you do is you start at the airplane's last known position. And for example, if an airplane takes off and nobody hears a word from it, the last known position was the airport of departure. And then you take a look at how far could that airplane fly given its fuel load. And so given the fuel that was on board the airplane, you would draw a large circle of a radius equal to how far that airplane could go. And what they do is they move that circle based on the wind. So if there's 50 knots of tailwind, or there's 50, let's say there's 50 knots of wind from the south, in this case. So if the wind is coming from the south, it's 50 knots. Well, then they would move that whole circle to the north because he could go farther to the north with that tailwind than he could to the south. And in fact, instead of becoming a circle, it becomes an oval there. Or another example is a guy takes off, he's on a 3-hour flight plan, and he flies 2.5 hours, checks in with flight service with a position report. So now his last known position is where he was after 2.5 hours of flight. You would draw a much smaller radius circle in that case for the maximum area of possibility because he has less fuel on board. He can't go as far. And so that would be a smaller area. Again, you would draw that circle. That circle would be biased for the wind, and you would limit your search activities to within the maximum area of possibility. There's no point in searching for a place that there's no way that a guy could possibly be there. Meteorological visibility, that's basically the maximum distance which you can see a large object. So a large object being a big building, a mountain, a large tower, something that's large, not limited by your visual acuity. It's limited by the meteorological condition, whether you got haze or fog or dust in the air, sand, all those things. Next up is the probability area. Well, we talked about the maximum area of possibility. I mean, that's anywhere that aircraft could be, or it could be a boat too. We don't need to necessarily talk about an airplane. This could be a boat, and you could apply the same principles to a boat. Well, it's more likely that vessel was moving on track, going to its destination. And so it's more probably along that line somewhere, plus or minus, than it would be in the opposite direction. So if a guy was flying from Maui to Honolulu, he's more likely to be somewhere between Maui and Honolulu than he is to be between Maui and the Big Island. We can use intuition, use any kind of sightings and those kind of things, discussions with people that are familiar with the pilot, knows how he flies. Is he meticulous or is he kind of lazy? Or does he fly instruments a lot? All those kind of things will help determine the probability area. And that's where the incident commander through the AOBD is going to focus a large part of the resources. And finally, probability of detection, or POD. That's the likelihood that a search aircraft will locate the objective, and that's usually a percent. And those percents are surprisingly low. Even though we go out and we methodically search an area and we use our best methods and our smartest, youngest scanners with the best eyeballs, it's still damn hard to see objectives out there. Again, we're not looking for the wing of a Boeing 737. We're looking for some scraps of sheet metal or a window or something. So probability detection isn't all that great on any one search of an area, but you do get a cumulative effect. You search that area multiple times. And so that's the thing that a incident commander is going to be tracking in the areas of probable or the probability area. He'll be tracking what the probability detection is in that area. Okay, scanning range, that's imaginary line out to which the scanners will be looking from directly below the search airplane out to that line. That's a scanning range. Scanning range is always going to be less than or equal to the search visibility. We never want to be looking past the search visibility because you're wasting your time. You're not going to see it. Search visibility takes into account the meteorological visibility, but also into account the size of the target that you're looking for. Search altitude is simply how high we are above ground level, or AGL is the term we use. Track, we talked about. Track is just where you're going. And the track spacing in a grid-aligned search or a parallel track search, the spacing between those tracks is something that we set in our briefing, and then we go out and execute it. We may have to modify it based on when you get out there and see what the real world terrain looks like, but that's the track spacing. And I believe I mentioned that typically we use a track spacing of about a half mile. That's kind of the going in position. And then depending on the conditions out there, you might be able to increase it if it's a large area, big cornfield, and very flat and easy to spot any anomalies. Or you might even have to make it smaller if it's poor visibility, dense forest kind of thing. Like we have some pretty dense forests, bamboo forests and stuff here in Hawaii. Okay, so now we know the lingo. It'll be make a lot more sense when we're out flying. Next objective here is to talk about damage assessment and what we're going to be doing and recording there. So CAP can be called upon for many different types of disasters. So, it's a response to hurricanes, flooding, volcanic eruptions, earthquakes, tsunamis, fires, landslides. Those are all things during my career that I've seen CAP get involved in. The second to the last bullet there, radio communication support, term we use is hybrid. And sometimes when aircraft are down low, they're rooting around 1,000 feet, we don't have contact with them, and we really want to maintain constant contact with our aircraft for a number of reasons. One is to redispatch them if we need to. Two is if they have some kind of emergency, need to do a off-airport landing, there's a way for them to communicate so that we know to send people to help them out there. From a command and control standpoint, sometimes we'll launch a hybrid. A hybrid will be an airplane that is up orbiting maybe around 8,000 to 10,000 feet and has a good line of sight to all of the other airplanes which are down low. And they can relay either manually using a person just talking on the radio, or we actually have an airborne repeater where we put a repeater in the airplane, which will increase the distance that our airplane's on the ground. The problem that, or challenge, I guess, is that if there's a disaster, we're going to be affected by that disaster as well. So we have to think about our own families and our own housing situations, make sure that those are under control first. But some of the things that could affect you would be extreme weather, winds, rain, those kind of things, landscape changes due to slides, flooding, some of the infrastructure, airports being closed. A lot of times when you have earthquakes, they close the control tower, evacuate the control tower. So there may not be ATC services. They call that ATC 0. So a lot of different challenges there. Hopefully we don't get into the chemical or biological or radiological terrorism. In many ways, damage assessment is much like flying search and rescue patterns. We might use some of the same patterns themselves and some of the same terminology, but we'll be looking for some different things. And if you look at that third bullet, I'll let you read those sub-bullets there. Kind of the bottom line is inquiring minds. If you're out there doing damage assessment, you're looking for any signs of what the damage has done or the potential for further damage if the water rises, for example, or the lava continues to flow, those kinds of things. Some specifics are listed here. So this will be very important on a damage assessment sortie to keep accurate notes so you can come back and debrief the folks there so they can get the information that they need. If you're an aerial photographer, then you might be equipped with a camera to record it. Even if you're not an aerial photographer, we all carry pretty darn good cameras in our pockets now in the form of a cell phone. So there's nothing wrong with shooting some pictures, but the worst thing is you come back and you see all these pictures, but you don't know where they are. So use some kind of a scheme to tag the photos. And a simple thing you can do is you'll maintain a log. And when you make an entry in the log, take a picture of that log sheet right after you take a picture of the infrastructure. And that way it'll tie the two together and you'll know what it is. Another thing you can do is take a snapshot of the GPS and you'll get the latitude and longitude that way. But you do want to write those down as well. So it's not doing a damage assessment sortie isn't a gee whiz to entertain you. It's to gather data, bring it back home to the decision makers so that they can use that data for mitigating whatever the situation is. CAP was actually the very first aircraft that was authorized to fly anywhere in the country after the World Trade Center bombing. And they were doing aerial surveys. Here's an example of a levee that's been breached. Bad news. If you are in a flood situation and you're looking for, you're checking the levees, one of the things you'd be looking for is water seeping underneath the levee, because eventually that would undermine it and it could give out. A huge response to the Gulf oil disaster where that well ended up spewing oil. And I'm going to play this videotape. It's actually pretty good.
Capt 138, Roger. 1205 miles south of Beach. Maintain 1,900, time stop, show project clear dial.
As the Southeast Region Commander, we set this mission up as a region mission rather than a specific wing, just simply because of the size of it and the fact that we knew that it would take far more than just one wing to respond to something this significant. And as the region commander, you know, I bear the responsibility of being the senior officer for the region. And as a result, it's my responsibility to ensure the success of our response to this disaster.
Let me widen out for you, Randy. Let me reorient.
Initially, they were looking at all parts of the coastline just to get an overall view of everything that was going on and what the coastline looked like. Then, as days progressed and the oil progressively got closer, then they started focusing on key areas, such as inlets into the inland waterways, openings where there may be pipelines or anything that could bring the water from outside in the Bay Area inside internally to the land area. It's amazing how it changes from day to day. One day the oil will be closer in towards shore, and depending on the weather, the currents, the wind direction, the next day it may be almost clear.
This is certainly different than missing aircraft search and rescue. It's also different than any other disaster relief mission I've ever been involved in.
We've been told that this could last up to 120 to 180 days. It's certainly the biggest thing I've ever worked. I was not actively involved in the response to Katrina, but my personal opinion is that if this has not exceeded the effort for Katrina, it probably will before it's over with.
And when they did that,
We've gotten a lot of very positive feedback from the people that we've supplied photos to. They've been impressed with the product that was delivered. They've been impressed with the professional nature of all of our crews that are involved in it. I think sometimes they're very surprised that we're all doing this as volunteers.
It feels just like it has on every other mission I've ever been on for CAP, particularly disaster relief. It's wonderful. It's a team, a large team, pulling together, getting the job done. The things that people who've not done this expect to see, the turf wars, the infighting, are not there. It's a wonderful experience.
So some other things, earthquake disaster response there, and you can see the part of the bridge collapsing there. Loma Prieta is about 60 miles or so south of San Francisco in California. And look at this over here, where some of these sections of the bridge just collapsed on top of the ones below, pancake right there. Magnitude 6.9. Tornadoes back in the Midwest. So you can see CAP has a lot of capacity to do damage assessment. I thought this was interesting. See somebody's pickup truck sitting inside the house. Some huge disasters. Hurricane Katrina. You see all the flooding there in New Orleans. Refinery fire. It's all black there. In fact, you can see they're still trying to put out the fire hose there, firefighters. Tsunami in California in 2011. Fortunately, it didn't affect us very much.